new church basics, and it's not to say there aren't more basic things we could talk about, but I think that when we're done these 5 classes, I'd like to get into a book, because once you're into a book, there's no cherry picking. There's no, even if you're dealing with like big, broad doctrine, everybody's got the stuff they gravitate towards and they think are the key concepts. If you read it straight out of the book, there's no fudging it. I'll look in the book and still personally, I'll draw out the things that I think are key. But if we're all reading the same book, you've seen it. There's no fudging it. So I do like books as a way to de-bias myself. But I do feel like this gives us a good framework to then go back and look at a book through the lens of, all right, I know the big broad brush strokes, this is what it's about. Now, how do I see the particulars within that general structure? All right, so the last one is conjugal love. But before we go anywhere near there, I want to keep going back to this seeing the doctrine as one thing. So, very first point, the first 2 doctrines that we talked about, the Lord and the Word. Well, how are those together? The Lord is the Word. That's the most simple, most obvious connection. If we're reading from the Word, it's the same as listening to the Lord. That's the Lord speaking to us. He is the Word and the Word is the Lord. It's all one. So that's a strong tie. The Lord is the center of heaven. This connects the Lord to the spiritual world, which is another one. The Word communicates with heaven. So this, we've got the Lord connected to the Word. We've got the Lord connected to heaven. We have the Word connected to heaven. So spiritual world, when we read the Word out loud, it draws angels near and it puts us into association with spirits in heaven. Or not necessarily reading the Word, but we can also draw to our, that is attractive. We can also draw to ourselves spirits from heaven, which is not what we want to do, but that isn't done by reading the Word. Our last class was on regeneration, and this one, let's see, how does it relate to the Lord? Regeneration moves us closer. So the Word is what teaches us how to regenerate, and the spiritual world is where our mind moves through by means of regeneration. The Lord is connected to the Word's connected to the spiritual world's connected to regeneration. These are all connected. So you can probably guess what I want to talk about next. So how does conjugal love relate to the Lord? How does it relate to the Word? How about the spiritual world? How about regeneration? So before we move on, we do need to put something down. We don't need to complete it, but we do need to put something down, because we've got to be able to pick up something from conjugal love that relates to the Lord, something that relates to regeneration. Anyone want to take a swing? Any one of the 4? Is that a hand secret? Okay, I didn't think so.
Conjugal love comes from the Lord.
Boom, there we go. Conjugal
What was
love.
that?
Conjugal love comes from the Lord. Yep, absolutely. That's a pretty clear connection to the Lord. If I had to pick, I actually think the Word is the hardest one to overtly tie.
Yes. When you think about the Word as like the marriage of good and truth, rather than like a marriage of a man and woman, I guess maybe that you can see more easily just the constant the, there's always the pairs of everything in the word, maybe.
Pairs in the word, yeah, the duality of good and truth.
Yeah.
Come back to that one. I think we can. I think we can hit that one a little harder, but I do think that is the most difficult. How about the spiritual world? What does conjugal love have to do with that?
Yes, the sphere of, well, maybe not the spiritual world, but heaven. You have the light representing the truth and the world representing the love, and that together is conjugal love.
Light and warmth in the spiritual world corresponds to conjugal love. Yes. What else could we say about the spiritual world? What happens if you don't find your spouse on earth? We'll have them in heaven. So your conjugal partner is going to be found in the spiritual world, even if you haven't found him on earth. So what about regeneration? What does that have to do with conjugal love?
Your personal regeneration is what makes you a good spouse
Yes.
and is what allows you to receive conjugal love from the Lord.
Yes.
I
So
know.
two good points. Regeneration does make you a more fit and able spouse. People are going to like you better if you've done more work. Great. But the second one is your ability to receive conjugal love from the Lord is directly tied to how regenerate you are. If you have done no regeneration, there's no room for conjugal love to come in. All right. So, still want to keep going back, especially because this is the concluding one. A few key points. Oh, it's going to be your turn. What did you want to add, buddy? The word does connect to the Lord. That's right. So if we're talking about the Lord, a few key points we touched on is that he is the center of the universe. That's why we started with him. He's the center of the universe. He's the center of heaven. All things revolve around him. So if that's true, if he's the most important thing, understanding what he loves helps us understand what we should do. And we spent a great deal of time talking about the Lord's three loves. So, three different times in our class on the Lord, I asked the question, what is the first nature of the Lord's love? And I asked it again.
Love people outside himself.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. So the first element of the Lord's love, buddy. Do you have something to add? The Lord is in heaven. That's true. So the first essential part of the Lord's love is to love others outside of himself. That helps us understand why he created people. The second one is a desire to be one with them. So that involves getting closer, nearer, farther. That helps explain why he would have the spirit world, regeneration. And the last one is to make us happy. Desire to render them blessed. So these are all direct quotes out of TCR 43. Let's talked about them, but that third one is what I really want to focus on. Render others blessed from himself. The Lord, as an essential part of what he loves, is to make others happy. Or last one, buddy, what did you want to say? The Lord does have food grow. That's true. All right. So still talking about the Lord, we had those three loves, and then a number of times, Divine Providence 27 is the one that I remember. But you know, there's about 24 references, exact quotation. The end in all creation is blank, 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 blank.
A heaven from the human race?
Correct. Yes. The end in all creation is a heaven from the human race. All right. So that's going to wrap up. That's kind of what we talked about with the Lord. The Word teaches us how we should act to make us happy. At the root of everything the Lord's telling us in the Word, it's getting about what should we do to make us happy. And that's a very self-centered way to look at it. To follow the Lord, to love the neighbor would be a much more outward looking way. But if we do those things, it's going to make us happy. Without the Word, our love inclines to hell. And this is an important point in that if we don't have the Word and we just go off of our gut feeling, it is not going to lead us toward the Lord. By heredity, we incline to evil, but with the Word, we can see, in spite of our heredity, that we want to make strides toward the Lord, and that's going to make us happy. So think of it as a compass. It always points to the Lord. What did you have to say, buddy? The Lord does make everyone. That is a good thing to keep in mind. And so another way to phrase the first point is the Word teaches us what evils need to be shunned so we can accept the Lord's love. And we'll get back to that in a minute. Spiritual world. We end up in a society filled with others who share similar love. I have really come to appreciate this idea about the spiritual world, where this is even true of hell. But the goal is to find yourself in a society of people who share your loves. And that's something across the board everyone is looking for. And when you get to the spiritual world, that's what you're searching for until you find that place where everybody is on the same page. Not the exact same, but on the same page. And, you know, hopefully we're striving for heaven, but this is something worth pursuing, which is a reason why I'm out in Missouri. There is something about growing up in a society, but there's also something about choosing a society. And I think that's a unique opportunity for starting something new, is you get this opportunity to end up somewhere because you chose it, because you looked around, you saw what options were available, and you said, this is where I want to raise a family, this is where I want my spiritual home to be. And you can do that with existing societies too. So it's not actually a knock on them, but I do think it's something that's really cool about starting something new, is we have this awesome opportunity to find that society, to make that society with others who share similar lives. So I think that's a really cool thing, that you don't have to wait to the spiritual world to pursue that goal. But another truism about the spiritual world is, we don't make it to the spiritual world and suddenly just completely change everything. We spend 80 years on earth living and acting one way, and then we get to the spiritual world and they say, heaven is this, hell is that, and you realize that, well, you just described my life being the same as hell, but I kind of wanted to go to heaven. The Lord will let you try it. But if you spent your whole life in the natural world acting hellishly, you don't get to the spiritual world and suddenly start acting heaven. You're gonna keep that same attitude, mindset, and loves, and that's going to translate into making hellish choices again. Can't remember if we talked about it, but one of my favorite teachings, which it does make sense, but I always on its face kind of scratch. We are not punished for any evil we commit in the world. That's a direct statement. We are not punished for any evil we commit in the world. But it then goes on to say that we're punished for the evils that we commit in the spiritual world, which are going to be a continuation of what we did in the world. So it's not what you did in the world is not held against you, but what you did in the world informs how you're going to continue to act moving forward. And those continuations are what we are judged. But isn't that tantamount to saying you're judged for what you did in the world? Kind of sounds like it to me, but anyway, I'm assured that it is not. And then in the spiritual world, the higher the heaven, the closer we are to the Lord. The closer we are, the happier we are. All right, regeneration. This is the mechanism by which we traverse the spiritual world. More regeneration equals closer to the Lord equals happy. All right, so now I want to get to conjugal love, the term. So we throw it around. If you grew up in the church, this is a very familiar word. If you didn't, the nearest English word is conjugal, which is decidedly not how we use the term conjugal. So to the onlooker, and admittedly, conjugal is not exactly a frequently used term these days, but nevertheless, if someone were to look at it, conjugal love, what church is talking about that? Conjugal, it's different, but they are related. So what does the term conjugal love mean? It means the marriage of one man and one woman. If we look at our canon 1907, it is not marriage unless it's a marriage of one man and one wife. And so the translator here decided to use the term marriage rather than conjugal. And so I have some, not right now, buddy. It's not going to, that's just a blank. So if conjugal love, this churchy term, simply refers to marriage, why not just use the term marriage? Well, there's a reason I say the definition is the marriage of a man and a woman, because society now accepts many different forms of marriage that do not fit the Lord's definition. And I think, Siegfried, this is why I believe having distinct terms helps. But mostly you can just substitute, anywhere you see conjugal, just substitute marriage. As long as what we're observing is that it's marriage of a man and a woman.
Calvin?
Yeah.
My understanding is that even the word conjugal that Swedenborg picked was not a common Latin term
It is
itself.
not.
So it's like he went to the trouble to pick a unique word for that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I do think Cicero uses conjugal. Not frequently, though. I think there's something like a dozen instances when you go on like Google and they track word usage over time, it's essentially non-existent. And then in the late 1700s, it spikes, where suddenly conjugal became a popular term, entirely spearheaded by Swedenborg. So yeah, it is a very obscure term. It does exist outside of Swedenborg, and it does, in that usage, also seem to just kind of mean marriage. But then, you get these definition things, and it's like, okay, well, yes, a man and a woman, and the emphasis is also on one. So polygamous marriage, this would be another thing where you might call it marriage, but that's not really how the doctrine would describe marriage. Because marriage is one man, one woman. Once you add more to that, it's not marriage. But the doctrine frequently talks about things in terms of a marriage that it in and of itself would not acknowledge as marriage, like evil and falsity. It talks about the marriage of evil and falsity, and sometimes it'll go through the effort of delineating. It'll say it's not marriage proper, it is more like an alliance of evil and falsity. But sometimes it just throws the word marriage out there. Even though, by this definition, we can all recognize, well, marriage of evil and falsity, that's not one man, one wife. So anyway, I still like conjugal, but I have come to get worried that in the church we sometimes use the term conjugal and have gone beyond marriage. There's a couple of different instances where even within the clergy, we've had ministers claim that they are married to somebody, but it's not their conjugal partner. And therefore, they should be able to get divorced because it's not their conjugal partner. And I think if you were to, again, like I'm kind of saying here, substitute marriage for conjugal, you are married to your partner who you don't think is your marriage partner. It just, no, we're talking about the same thing. You can't just say that's not it. So I do worry sometimes that we overemphasize the spiritualness of conjugal and lose sight of, well, at the end of the day, it's who you're married to. And then I bring this up at a doctrinal class full of teens. I remember, I forget what I asked, but it was something about who you're going to be married to, and they're like, who you're married to or your conjugal partner. And I was like, whoa, let's slow down. You don't think those are the same? So I don't think it's entirely without basis. I do think there is some cause. We do sometimes separate conjugal from marriage, and we don't. They're the same thing.
So I hear this phrase thrown around the church sometimes. That's when a couple is maybe thinking about getting engaged. They say, oh, I feel that this person is my conjugal partner and that's why I'm going to marry them. But I feel like marrying this person, so I'm going to marry them. So that kind of.
All right, one more time, sorry, I'm
Um,
parental ears or.
you hear people say, oh, I am engaged to this person because I feel that they're my conjugal partner. So in a sense, they're saying, I'm going to marry this person because I feel like marrying this person.
Go.
Yeah.
Now, here's where terminology gets tricky. Is the doctrine does parse out a difference between conjugal love and truly conjugal love. And on earth, you could have conjugal love with the person you're married to. You could have marriage with the person you're married to. And when you get to the spiritual world, you might find you honored your marriage vows, you lived out a faithful marriage, and internally there was not as much in common, and you'll peaceably separate in the next life and find the person who you do share those deepest, inmost friendship. And your truly conjugal partner is going to be that person. And I think sometimes we talk shorthand and take out the truly. I'm going to marry this person because I believe they're my truly conjugal partner, which, you know, I would generally recommend that if you're going to get married, I hope you think that that's who you're going to end up with beyond the natural world. But I do think that's the terminological shift, is when we jump from conjugal to truly conjugal, and the doctrine doesn't even maintain a consistent usage. It also, like we speak in the shorthand, so does the doctrine. Sometimes the doctrine will contrast the two. Other times, it'll talk about conjugal love, not truly conjugal love, just conjugal love as a spiritual, chaste, pure, and holy thing, which, if the definition is simply the marriage of one man and one woman, regardless of how evil, corrupt, or licentious it might be, well, that can't possibly be spiritual, holy, clean. And yet, by definition, it's a man and a woman who are married. That's it. So clearly it's talking about truly conjugal love without having called it truly conjugal love, suffering from the same shorthand that we speak in. You have to rely on context, which is frustrating. I think it was Jeremy Simmons, maybe, who he's like, I just wish the Lord was more terminologically consistent, but oh well. I too wish it was just a this equals in every case, in every instance, and you do have to read the context, I'm afraid. All right, adultery. I don't actually want to spend a lot of time on this tonight, but I do want to note that the doctrine spends a ton of time talking about the evils that we should shun rather than the good things we should do. I would point to the 10 Commandments as just a base example of it's 8 things we shouldn't do and only 2 things we should do. I'm not sure the doctrine is quite that heavily weighted, but you know, in my counseling courses I took, they really emphasized 5 positive things before 1 negative thing. Apparently the Lord did not get the memo, and did 4-1 the opposite. Don't do all these bad things. And by the way, here's 2 nice things that you can do. So if I had to just briefly, Doctrine of Charity 23, in proportion as a man does not will to do evil to the neighbor, he wills to do him good, but not the converse. So you can't just jump the gun right to doing good, being charitable. You have to start by not hurting your neighbor, then you can work on helping. But if you're helping them while simultaneously hurting them, it just doesn't fly. So I bring this up as in order to love marriage, we need to shun the evil of adultery. It's one of the commandments, and most of the context, with the exception of conjugal love, most of the context in which teachings about marriage come up in the doctrine are when talking about adultery. Like the commandment against adultery in the Arcana, in Apocalypse Explained, that is largely where we get a lot of really beautiful teachings about marriage. And so, another truism is you shun the evil and the opposite good takes its place. And the doctrine pits adultery and conjugal love up against each other. This is the fundamental love of hell, and conjugal love is said to be the fundamental love of heaven. And so they're pitted up. You shun the one, you're going to receive the other. But that's all I really want to say about adultery tonight. I do think at some point we're going to have to spend one dismal class on just what does the doctrine teach about adultery. But tonight, despite the 10 Commandments and the doctrine, we're going to focus mostly on the positive. But I do this disclaimer. We have to, at some point, deal with the evil because the Lord says we do. All right, moving on from that. So, conjugal love, happiness. Why do we want conjugal love? Because all the blessings of heaven, all of them, flow from the delights of conjugal love. Through conjugal love, man has peace. And, as I'm saying this, I'm just noting AE is Apocalypse Explained, number 999. That's in a section on the commandment about adultery. But you get this nice little nugget about conjugal love. That's how you experience peace. That's how you get the blessings of heaven. So this gets back to why did the Lord create? But what is the third nature of the Lord's love? To make others happy. What do we get when we have conjugal love? A lot of happiness, peace. That's how the Lord is giving us that happiness. This is one of those primary ways. Could I get a volunteer to read Conjugal Love 65?
Conjugal love is the fundamental love of all loves in heaven and the church because it originates from the marriage between good and truth. And from this marriage springs all the loves which form heaven and the church in a person.
Yes, thank you. Conjugal love originates from the marriage between good and truth. So it's a step below. If we think of the spiritual son, the origin of good and truth in the Lord as one thing, it flows down through the heavens. And if we do a good job regenerating and honoring our marriages, they start off together, linked in the Lord. They separate as they go through the heavens. And if we do our job, good and truth come back together. And so you've got a nice circuit. They're united in the Lord. They separate as they leave. And if we do a good job of loving him and the neighbor and our spouses, we're going to put good and truth back together and complete that circuit. And that's a happy thing. Okay. I need to keep track of the Lord's goals. Does anybody know another term for end, cause, and effect? There's two ways you could answer this. You could either pick three different words or the term the doctrine uses to describe these three things. But I'm interested in both. And try and retranslate those three. Yes, but that's not how I'm. So another translation that has been used is goal, plan, and execution. I love end, cause, and effect, partly because they're not just doctrinal terms, but in like 1700s philosophy, those terms were used. End, cause, and effect have been used in philosophical thought for generations. So to let them just disappear would be sad. But personally, I have an easier time holding the three and understanding them, like which step I'm at with goal, plan, execution, than end, cause, and effect. So I flashed that before you. If you're like me, you'll like end, cause, and effect better, but goal, plan, execution will help you remember what they are. So the term for those is discrete degrees. Discrete degrees, you've got end, cause, and effect all working with each other. All right, so I bring that up because that word end is right here. All right, I jumped the gun. Is marriage the goal? Shouldn't have flashed it. No, marriage surprisingly is not the goal. The end, this is the exact same word that's translated as goal. The goal of marriage is the procreation of offspring. Buddy, they're my toys that I'm letting you play with. I'm letting you share with them. Chickens. So when I got married, I wanted to have kids. That was a huge reason I was getting married. I was really excited to have kids. Anyway, what I also remember talking about was at the end of the day, I will spend eternity with Liza and not whatever kids we have. I might end up in a society with my kids. I don't know. But I do know I want to spend eternity with her. So, isn't that the goal? And yet, in Conjugial Love, in two different places, it specifically says, well, no. And in fact, there's other places still in the doctrine that make the point that the goal is actually procreation, and marriage is the cause. It's part of the plan. And this gets back to, we started with the Lord. What are his goals? Well, heaven from the human race, remember? Well, That's the goal. And the Lord saw that if he wanted that goal to be met, he needed an orderly way of producing offspring in marriage. And then the effect, the execution, is when we actually do it. When people actually follow through, get married, raise kids who become angels in heaven. The Lord had a goal. He created marriage as part of his plan to fulfill that goal, and then gave us the freedom to follow through. For me, this has just been a huge realization of the last like 3 years that I think of marriage as kind of the end point, or beginning rather. And yet it's that middle step. It's part of the plan, but it's not the finish line, and it's not even the origin point. It's wedged right in the middle. And this surprised me. And still kind of does surprise me, because mostly when I hear discussion about marriage, it's me and the individual, and yet the doctrine seems to push more emphasis on, well, part of why we have marriages is to procreate. Now, I do want to address the fact that there are people who can't have kids, people who get married when they're too old that they could never have kids. Does that mean that they shouldn't get married? No. That's not what I believe. I don't think that's what the doctrine's saying. But I do think the doctrine is saying this is a major part of why we get married. And we need to hold that in mind. Another quote. It says, "It's apparent from that the sphere of conjugal love is allied with the sphere of procreating." In Conjugial Love 385, which I referenced but didn't read, it says there are two universal spheres. The sphere of procreating and the sphere of protecting what is procreating. Well, Conjugial Love, which is not a universal sphere, is allied with the sphere of procreating, for procreation is the end, conjugal love is the intermediate cause by which it is affected. So again, procreation is the end or the goal, and conjugal love, marriage, is the cause by which you have. All right. Marriage the goal. Yeah. Nope, it's not. That's a surprising one for me. All right. So now I want to go back through. We started with the Lord, the Word. I want to go back through and specifically relate conjugal love to the Lord. And these are direct quotes. Conjugal Love 308. Marriages descend from the Lord himself and are formed according to the state of the church in the contracting parties. And truly conjugal love comes from the Lord alone. So it all starts with him, and it is formed according to the state of the church, which kind of brings us into regeneration. Another one. This one appears two different places. Ivan nods in agreement. Conjugal love is love to the Lord. Conjugal love is love to the Lord. So there are only 4 loves, the doctrine says. Can you name them?
Self, community, first world,
Yeah.
Lord,
neighbor.
Yep. Yep, those are the only four loves. Not quite true, but depends what you mean. Those are the four universal loves. Love of self, love of the world, love of the neighbor, love of the Lord. Conjugal love is love to the Lord, which is the highest love. All who are in love, truly conjugal, are in love to the Lord because it descends from the marriage of the Lord with the church. Hence it is that they who are in the third heaven, who are all in love to the Lord, are in love truly conjugal. Love truly conjugal cannot be given except by the Lord. So conjugal love linked with the highest ruling love. This is not to say that people who love the neighbor therefore do not have conjugal love, but it is saying that if you are in love to the Lord, you do have conjugal love. All right, the word. Since a Christian person knows the Lord is in possession of the word and has the church from the Lord through the word, it is apparent that they have a capability and potential beyond that of a non-Christian for being regenerated and thus becoming spiritual, and also for attaining truly conjugal love, inasmuch as the two go together. So I found it interesting that our church is almost bipolar in being super eclectic and also kind of exclusive simultaneously. At the same time, we're one of the few religions that you do not have to be baptized new church to go to heaven. That is squarely in our doctrine. And yet there's lots of things like this wonderful blessing, conjugal love, all blessings flow from it, all happiness, it's love to the Lord. It then goes ahead and says that it's apparent that a Christian person, now it doesn't specify new Christian, it just points out that Christians in particular have a capability and potential beyond that of non-Christians for being regenerated, which we know is really important, becoming spiritual, which we know is super important, and attaining truly conjugal love, which we know is super important. So at the same time that we don't believe that you have to be new church, the doctrine does double down that you're going to be happier if you do. The necessity is not there. There are Hindus who can go to heaven. There are Buddhists who can go to heaven. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be as happy as someone who has the threefold revelation. It will make you happy. It has an increased capability and potential for regeneration, becoming spiritual, and having conjugal love. So there's a lot in there about the individual. We've got something to gain and benefit, and yet I think sometimes we rely a little too heavily on, well, people of any faith can go to heaven. It's like, well, yes, I do believe that, but do we sometimes not try and share what we have because we're so complacent with, well, I believe they can go to heaven. They don't need to be new church for this. My push to talk about it a little more. You never know who might discover the church just by being a little more open about your faith. And that'll make them happy. Conjugal love and heaven. the sphere of conjugal love is the essential atmosphere or sphere of heaven. The sphere of conjugal love is the essential atmosphere of heaven because it descends from the heavenly marriage of the Lord and the church. Conjugal love 54. LJP. Does anybody know what that references to?
Judgment.
Posthumous, yes. Last Judgment posthumous. Which is the precursor to continuation of the Last Judgment. Or LJC. Anyway, marriage is heaven itself. So I would say there's a pretty clear connection in the same way that the Lord is the Word, marriage is heaven. Where you've got that really nice short, this equals that. And I don't know, happy days of reflection on my marriage. It does feel pretty heaven. Not every day, but most days, it feels pretty heavenly. All right. Conjugal love is a spiritual love. Time to get it. So we said earlier that truly conjugal love is all these things. Sometimes it just says conjugal love is. I did pick two intentionally that are truly conjugal love, putting the emphasis on the spiritual nature of marriage. So let's try it. We'll substitute conjugal out for marriage. True marriage love is a chaste love and has nothing in common with unchaste love. It is a love of the spirit and consequently of the body, not a love of the body and consequently the spirit. It's not that people who have conjugal love are totally unattracted to their spouse's body. It says actually you are, but it starts with the spirit, then the body, not the reverse. The reverse is linked specifically with licentious love. Not a pleasant thing. So the order matters. It's not that, often in media you'll get these attacks on marriage is restricting, it's no fun, all the flavor is gone. No, it doesn't have to be. The emphasis is on where you start. If you start with the body, that's problematic. But if you start with the spirit and make it to the body, that's actually in order. That's part of how it's designed. And then conjugal love 432, a person who is in a state of truly conjugal love becomes more and more spiritual. And the more spiritual anyone is, the more human they are. That's an interesting idea for me, as we, sometimes we talk, I'm only human, I'm merely human. Hey, what can you do? I'm human. The doctrine even talks about the Lord as he's the only human. Where, like, he is human. He's truly human. So the emphasis in the doctrine of how it uses the term human is actually a good thing. The Lord is human, and we are supposed to try and become more human, not less. Which also, we have these two different warring ways we use it. Inhumane, inhuman. Well, that's clearly a bad thing. We don't want to be inhuman, but we also say that our weakness is attributed to our humanness. Which is it? Can't be both. Conjugal love and regeneration. Truly conjugal love advances in a person in the same degree as the state of the church in them, because that love is from the Lord. earlier we had passages that linked the state of the church and regeneration being linked. Um, so conjugal love also is linked to all those things. Basically, becoming a better person will help you with your marriage. Working on your marriage will help you become a better person. The more you love the church, it's going to like these are all connected things. They're not disconnected. All right. And then this is actually already the last slide. Marriage is a central blessing from the Lord. This is one of my favorite quotes, and I know ministers say that about everything, but this really is. The conjugal union of one man with one wife is the precious jewel of human life and the repository of Christian religion. Conjugal love is the precious jewel of human life because the character of a person's life is such as the character of that love in him, that love forming the inmost elements of his life. So it's likened to a jewel and a repository. And what I love about repository is in the doctrine, it's said to be a place of safekeeping. And so in the marriage of a man and a woman, it is a precious jewel. It's something beautiful to behold in human life. And it's also a place of safekeeping for the Christian religion. Siegfried, get that ball away from that glass of water. So the Christian religion is kept safe when there is the marriage of a man and a woman. One man, one woman, the Christian religion is kept safe. And so this idea of, yes, your marriage does serve you and your spouse. Yes, it's supposed to be a joint operation with the Lord, and it goes even bigger than that. It's not just you and your spouse, it's not just you and your kids. The whole Christian religion benefits from the strength of your marriage, you honoring your marriage vows, you keeping them and working on it. That keeps the Christian religion safe. That's something you can do simply by maintaining and protecting your marriage. You're helping the whole Christian religion. And I do think we're at a time where it feels like it's worse than before, but I really do think hell has always attacked marriage. And it's used different avenues to do it, but marriage is always going to be under attack. And I think that is specifically because if marriage is the fundamental love of all loves, if conjugal love is the love of all loves, hell has every reason to try and tear it down, smear it, make it worthless. That's what hell's going to want to do to the love of all loves. So I don't think there's ever going to be a time where it's not under attack. And so whatever generation you're in, whatever the times, the world benefits from people honoring their marriages and sticking to them. And that goes far beyond just you as an individual, you as a spouse, those in your local community. The world needs strong marriages, and that's something we can contribute right now. That is all I wanted to talk about tonight from me, and I wanted to leave more time up for questions, comments, and if not, I would love to pick people's brains on a book to get into. But first, questions or comments?
I had a question concerning the offspring from marriage. Is offspring to be interpreted only as babies being born, or in in heaven, can there be the form of offspring from marriage, conjugal marriage there?
Uh, hmm. Well, I would say the doctrine certainly does say that in heaven, natural offspring are replaced with spiritual offspring. So I would think both would be the answer. Given that, it relates the one to the other, and you're not in the natural world, now you have spiritual offspring, and seems to me that it would apply to both. On the thing that we're talking about, this world versus not, the two universal spheres, procreating and protecting what's procreated. That latter one, I think, is I think pretty naturally that's what people fall into if they can't have kids of their own. But yet they love marriage. They find ways to protect, if not their children, other people's children, offspring, being great adopted uncles and aunts, adopted grandparents, that sort of thing. There's all sorts of reasons, and that second one, they're supposed to go together. And so if one's missing, I would think that the other one would find especially a way to play out. Was there a, or rather maybe, is there a particular, is there a particular doctrine of the five that we talked about that you felt is disconnected from the other ones? Or do they all seem to harmonize fairly obvious?
I think initially there were a few that were kind of broken up, but after the class, it all fell in love.
Good.
Going back to this for a moment, a quick question. And I think you kind of answered it with the comment that you made, but after childbearing years biologically on the natural earth, you're just protecting this then, and that's
Yes. So I think that loops back to Byron's question. I think you can have, when the doctrine describes spiritual offspring, it's goods and truths being married together, which is kind of what we're trying to do our entire lives. So I don't think that spiritual offspring is something that only happens in heaven, but it's something that you cannot have natural offspring in heaven. And so by the time you get to heaven, you will only be having spiritual offspring. But I do think on earth, you can be marrying good together with truth on earth and producing spiritual offspring. So in that sense, I think you can still be procreating well on earth, but spiritually.